Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and today we're going to get in the mood for Valentine's Day with this super simple Lovebirds painting. Make sure you check out the video description below for a full list of materials, and let's get started. For our background, we're going to do a relatively simple, smooth blend. And the reason for that is because I've been getting a lot of questions lately about how to properly blend. So we're going to spend some time on that. I'm going to take my 1-inch flat brush and wet it in my jar and wipe a bit off on the edge. You want some water to be in there because it's going to help you get a nice smooth blend. So if you're using a brush dry, that could be part of it. Also, this is a brand new canvas straight out of the package. I haven't gessoed it or anything. Another thing that is going to help you get the paint down into the texture of the canvas is if your brush is firm. See, when I push my brush down, you can tell that it's got some firmness to it. It's got a good flick. It's not a super soft brush. It's very, very dense, and those bristles really help push the paint into the canvas. If you're using a very soft brush, it doesn't have the strength to get that paint down into the texture or push the paint very far. Now, I'm going to start by loading my brush with paint. And loading your paintbrush doesn't mean going like that. That's not a load of paint. This is how you load paint onto your brush. I'm going to put it into the edge of the paint there, and I'm going to smash it kind of flat. And what that's doing is sucking the paint up into the bristles. It's not just floating around on the outside of the brush. It's getting into it like a sponge. So I'm just pulling a bit out, squashing it down, and now my brush is loaded with white paint, even though it just looks like there's some on the outside. Now, when applying paint, there's really two different modes. You can press your brush flat, which lays down quite a lot of paint, and that's how I'm going to start up here. Just kind of back and forth, always pressing my brush flat. Just getting kind of a bright spot up here. Now I'm not going to wash off my brush because that's also going to help get a nice transition into the next color since I still have some white on here. In fact, I'm going to pick up just a bit more white. I only smashed it on one side. And I'm going to come over to my quinacridone and I'm going to smash that on the other side. I'm not really trying to mix the colors. I'm just picking up some of that next color. Now, you can't tell on the camera here, but my white paint stops right about here. So I'm going to start this next color just below it and press flat to lay that paint down. You don't want to press flat like that up in here because then you're just going to end up covering that. Once I have that paint laid down below that first color, I'm going to release my pressure a bit. See how I'm only using the end of the brush? And look at that, how it smoothed the colors together. If I continue to use heavy pressure here, I'm going to lay down more paint and I'm going to have a hard time getting a blend. But I'm barely touching my brush to the canvas. Kind of like I'm dusting a shelf with a feather duster or something. That's about the pressure I'm using. And see how smooth that blend is with no effort. Now if I come over here, I can lay my brush down flat again and lay down a ton more paint. Release my pressure. Super light pressure there, just back and forth. And those colors are blended together. If you end up with a spot that you feel like is just not blending properly, like right here, because I was kind of dragging some extra color off the top of my canvas, so I have a little more of a line there than I really want. I'm going to come into my white, and I just picked up a little on the end, and same pressure, just with the end. I'm going to work that back here into this pink again. There we go. Much better. Let's do that on the other side too. A little white on one side, quinacridone on the other. Press it flat to lay the paint down just outside of that white. Super light pressure here to dust them together. Now you do want to work a little on the quicker side because acrylic paint doesn't take very long to dry. And if that white dries, then you will have a harder time blending it. It's possible still, you could just pick up some more white and keep going, or you could use matte medium, which will make the quinacridone more transparent so that it thins it out and makes it look like it's blending into the white, when really it's just kind of transparent and floating over the top of it. Now I'm just going to load up with quinacridone. I didn't pick up any more white. I'm going to do the same thing here. See how I started just below that? And then lightening my pressure to work up into it. Heavy pressure there, light pressure there. All right, I still have some white and quinacridone, but I'm gonna go straight into my deep violet. Actually, maybe I will pick up some quinacridone on the other side. Same thing, starting below, heavy pressure. Much lighter, softer pressure as I work up into the previous color. I want a pretty true purple now, but I don't want to clean off my brush, so I'm just going to wipe off as much paint as I can on my paper towel. One more tip. If the paint is loaded into your brush the way I showed you versus globbed on to the end, you're going to have much more control of how much paint you're laying down. If you just have a big ball of paint on the end, you're going to put it exactly where your brush hits the first time, and it's going to be much more work to spread around. But if it's absorbed into there, think of it like a sponge. If you have a sponge that's loaded up with water, you can lightly wipe that sponge to spread just a little bit of the water, or you can squeeze it to really get a lot of the water out. It's the same principle here. So load it into the bristles because you can get more out by pressing harder, or you can just get a light amount by using the very end of the brush lightly. All right, now I have some white chalk, and hopefully you can see it okay on here. What I'm going to do first is add my main swirl, because that's going to determine where our birds are placed. So I'm going to start down here and come up, down, and we'll give it a good swirl there, except for my canvas. But we can adjust any of that when we actually do the paint. Now that we know where the main swirl is, before we add any others, we want to draw our birds on so that they don't get crunched into this little corner. So I'm going to go fairly simple with my birds, and what I'm going to do first is draw a line starting about where I want the head and kind of at an angle to determine the bird's posture. Make sure you take it down just a little below the line, because if your bird's bum is right up here on the top of the line, it's going to look a little weird, like he's kind of balancing on top rather than sitting on the line. My next bird, I don't want to make him eye level because this is a little lower, and then I'm going to have this giganto bird and this smaller bird. So I'm going to make them about the same size, and they can be in slightly different positions. I'm going to start with this bird, and on the end of the line here, I'm going to draw a circle for his head. And then his body. Now, I don't want this line to be directly in the center of his body because then he's going to be fat on both sides. And I want it to seem like he's kind of facing this way. If you want it to seem like he's got his back directly to you and his head is turned, you can make it wide on both sides. But that's not how I want this bird. So I'm going to draw an oval that's a little smaller on that back side and bigger toward the front. Smooth this line down toward the back so he doesn't look like a weird snowman with a big angle in the back of his head. And then here I'm going to smooth that line too, but not like that, because that's going to look weird. I'm going to kind of smooth it in so it's a little more curved like that rather than like that. And we'll give him a nice plump body. And now he has a little point here, and that's where his tail's going to come out. The next bird, we're going to do his head in the same way. And his body in about the same way. And then let's give them beaks. Now their beaks can really go wherever you want them to go. I want them to look like they're kind of looking at each other. They're lovebirds, so. And this is a Valentine's painting, so they're kind of paying attention to each other. It's just little triangles. Keep in mind what kind of birds you're drawing. If their beaks are hooked, they're going to look like birds of prey, maybe ravens or hawks, something. If their beaks are little triangles, they're going to seem like seed-eating birds, so chickadees or robins or something. Let's give an idea of where their tails are going to be. So I'm going to come from right where I made that point and bring it down and around like that. Same thing over here. Kind of down and around like that. And they can be however you want them to be. I think I'm going to actually bring this one down a little more. And then we'll add other details as we actually start painting it in. I'm just going to mess with their shapes a bit more before we start adding the black paint. All right, so I have my angle brush and I've wet it in the jar and wiped it on the edge, just like when we did the background with the large brush. And I'm doing a very similar thing loading up my paint. So I'm kind of reaching in to just the edge of the paint, pulling it back and pressing it flat, and that's sucking the black paint up into my brush. And it's also wiping off any blobs. So if you see, my brush still looks very smooth, but I have a good amount of paint there. Now there's a couple things that are going to happen when I go over this white chalk. First of all, it's very dry, so my paint's not going to go as far as it normally would. And if that happens, just keep a little extra water and get more paint whenever you need. The other thing is that this white chalk is going to pull into my black and it's going to make it a little on the gray side. Typically I wouldn't want that, but I actually don't mind it here. And if you like that look, but you're not getting it from whatever you drew your birds with, then you can just get your black paint and then come in and grab just like a little pinpoint of white here and there. And then as you smooth it on, you'll gray down the paint just a little bit, but I don't want to do that with the white paint because I'm going to have plenty of that from the chalk. I'm going to start with the point of my brush right on the beak. So just like that. And remember, the tip of the angle brush always drags. So I'm going to come from there up around the head. I'm rolling the brush in my hand to go around the corner here. Down the back. And I'm just going to kind of end at that point. We'll take care of that part in a minute. Same thing here. I'm going to start on the bottom of the beak, just like that. And I'm going to roll it. See how I'm twisting the brush in my hand to get it to go around that little corner there. Bring it down. And just kind of end at that point. Let's do that to our other bird. Now, rolling your brush like that does take a little bit of practice. So if you're not comfortable doing that, you can absolutely use a round brush or whatever kind of brush you're comfortable with. I'm going to go ahead and fill them in. A little extra water. Take care of those holes. Ooh, I got a little drip of water that's getting out of control. If that happens, you get a little drip of water like that, don't panic. Just take a paper towel, just the corner of it, and just touch the paper towel to the drip. Don't try and wipe at it. Just touch a paper towel to the drip, and that will absorb the extra water. Now right here at the bottom of the bird, it got really transparent because of that extra water, but I'm just gonna leave that be right now because if I try and go over that with paint, I may make it worse. But once it's dry, I can come back and touch that up. Always use the edge of your brush like that to make sure you've got a crisp line. Don't try and draw a line with your brush flat like that because you'll lose control of the tip of the brush. Once you've got them all filled in with black, then you can tell if there's any areas where you want to reshape them a little bit. So I'm going to bring the back of the head out and around just a little bit more. Got kind of an egg head here, so I'm going to smooth that off a little. Let's do the main lines of their tails. And I have my hand resting on my canvas, and that's helping me control the pressure because I just want a thin line to start with. A thin line is much easier to make adjustments to later than a big fat line. I know that kind of makes him look like a rat. He's not going to look like a rat, I promise. So I really don't like either one of these chalk lines. So I just kind of did my own thing there. Now we can use a little more pressure and get that tail tapering out from his body. So I'm putting a little heavier pressure there and then releasing it as I go, so that it has a nice smooth transition from the body to the tail. A little heavier pressure there, let's widen that out. Same over here, so I'm coming down off the back of the body, a little heavier pressure, smooth it in. Off the front, a little bit of heavier pressure, and release as I come down. I have a round brush now that I've also wet in the jar. And I'm going to draw kind of a little swoopy, feathery end. Oh, I got out of control. That's all right. So if you get little spots you don't like outside of it, take a clean damp brush before it dries, before that paint dries, and you can just wipe it right back in. It just takes it right away, no problem. And let's do it on this side. Now this chalk comes off pretty easy, and I want to completely reshape this. Be careful about using a damp brush to wipe off chalk lines right now. If I were to go over that way too much, I'd start lifting the background, even though the background is dry to the touch. The paint does need about 3 days to cure fully, so I'm just going to kind of blot the water off of there. And let's add some other little flurry lines. And remember that you can change any of these. You don't even have to do them, even though you've drawn them on. This isn't a coloring book where you have to stay inside the lines. You can change anything. Let's have something reaching over them there. That one's hard to see because it's in the white. Let's go over it with some pink. There we go. And then we'll add some other little ones as we go. Let's go ahead and get those main ones on. So my angle brush with a bit of extra water, Nice thin paint is going to help us get a nice flowing line. I'm going to start down here, put a good amount of pressure on because I want it to be nice and wide there at the bottom. And then it can just taper off as I go. For the rest of the line, I'm going to try and keep it pretty thin right now. Because again, a thin line is easier to adjust than a heavy line. Just right over top of my birds. And rotating it in my hand as I bring it around. Now, if you have any wobbly spots in your lines that even after you've smoothed it out, there's a spot that's just wobbly, that's okay because you can come off of it later and make another little flurry bit off of it. So don't worry about that. Just get your line on there and we'll take care of everything else later. For these little ends, if you're much more comfortable using a liner brush like this, that's perfectly okay. Okay, let's go ahead and just kind of make sure everything is smooth, that the lines are as wide as you want them. And then we'll move on to some details. Take your time here while you're adjusting the lines. Don't try and do it fast. You know, the slower you go and the more time and attention you put into it, the nicer your lines will be. If you try and do it super fast, then you're gonna end up with lines that you don't like. And remember, when trying to get thin lines, it's all about pressure. It doesn't matter how small the brush is you're using. If you put too much pressure on it, you're gonna get a line that is bigger than you want it to be. So let me give you an example. With my angle brush here, with little pressure, I can get a nice razor thin line. With heavier pressure still on the edge, I can get a much fatter line. Likewise, with this little liner brush, even though it's a very narrow little brush, very fine pressure, I can get a nice thin line. Heavy pressure, I can get a very fat line. So put your hand on your canvas and maintain pressure control. So let's start adding some little details. I'm gonna go to my liner brush and it's wet and then just kind of clicked off to get the extra water off. Rather than wiping it on the edge of the jar, I just click it around like that to flick off any extra drips. So look at a lot of vector images of things like floors and decorations to get ideas for what to do here. I used a lot of images off of graphic stock to get ideas for how to do these little designs. So we're just giving them little feathers poking off here and there. They can be off of the back or the front. You can fill them in solid black, or you can leave some of the background showing through it. You could fill that little hole in with a different color, whatever you want to do. Get super creative. You can do anything with these. Let's add a little spiral off of the end here. Widen it out a bit. Always get more water when you feel like you're getting a little bit of drag or it's just not covering as well. I'll zoom in here so you can see what I'm doing on the little ends. I'm going to make some little feathery bits on the ends here. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to drag backwards from the tip, put a little extra pressure on my brush, and release it as I come around. And if you see right here, I got outside of my line. I could clean that off, but that's kind of a tight space. So actually what I'm going to do is go with it and just make a little spiral off of it. My brush kind of broke into two lines while I was doing that one, but I kind of like that, so I don't think I'm going to change that. But if you didn't like that, you could just make it into one big little feather end. I actually might bring this one down just a little more. So I think what I want you to take out of today's video more than anything else is brush control. You know, keep your hand on your canvas when you're trying to get super fine details, or if you have a hard time with getting thin lines, please keep your hand on your canvas. Know that there's anything that you can change. You're not stuck with anything. It can all be changed. I made like a little feather end here, but it's not actually attached to the tail. It's kind of floating off on its own. And I like that. They're little whimsical birds. Not all of their feathers have to be attached to their bodies. I think I'm going to leave the inside open, just like some of those other ones. All right, I'm going to stick with my liner brush for quite a bit of this. Let's add some little design elements all over in the swirlies. So I think I'm going to come to this one first, and I'm going to draw around my stem because I want to see a little bit of this purple around each side. That's just going to make things a little bit more fun. So I'm going to bring a line right up along the edge here. Careful not to go too close to touch that first line. And I'm going to do another one on the other side. Just keep control of the pressure of your brush so it doesn't get too fat and cover up your little purple background that shows around there. And I'm going to bring it around there. And then I'm going to draw kind of a fun little whimsical leaf shape on there. And come up, out, make a little curl. And to a little point here. I'm going to fill it in with this little liner brush. And then I have a little bit here on the line where kind of got away from me, and I don't really want to make it any fatter, so I'm just going to come off of that little piece and make a curl. Maybe a little more pressure and get kind of a leaf shape on the end there. Let's do another one here. This one I am attaching to the stem. I'm going to make a little leaf off at the end of here, so continuing on that line, I'm just going to put a little extra pressure and kind of flick it that way. That might take a little bit of practice. Just get a junk canvas or something and practice little motions like that. You know, just heavy pressure and release over and over and over, and figure out what kind of shapes you can get and what you do or don't like about them. What kind of brush does what kind of shape. I think I'm actually gonna bring this down a little bit more, and then I'm gonna put like a little berry or something on the end there. So I feel like I wanna make a little flower here. So I'm gonna sketch it out first because I'm not fully sure what I want it to look like. I think I want it to have a little bit of a bud toward the bottom, and then kind of come out with a little flick, up this way with a little curl. Let's try something like that. I'm totally experimenting here. This is not an element that I'd planned on doing already. I'm going to go back to my angle brush, and I'm going to add some little leaves around our flower here. So I'm going to come off the stem here where it's a little bit wobbly and weird, bring it out, apply some heavier pressure, and release it. Now I've got a little leaf. But if you need to draw it completely with the liner brush and then fill it in, that's okay. I think I'm going to do another one here above it. So off of the stem, out, heavier pressure, and release. Let's do one right here too. So up, out, pressure, release. I think I'm just going to add a few of those all over the place. Right here, we're going to do something a little different. I'm still using my angle brush, and I'm going to draw a little bit of a larger element in here. Again, it's not going to be right on this little swirl. I'm going to start just above it, leave a little bit of a gap there, bring it up, it separates a little bit. And then I'm going to do another one right off of the end here and bring it up higher and a little shorter. And then I'm going to connect them. And fill it in. I might leave a little bit of a gap in there where you can see some of the background through it. And if leaving those little gaps is too hard for you, then don't do it. You can always come back in later once the black is dry and add little highlight lines with either the background color or even just white. Back to my liner, and I'm going to give it a little bit of a curl in the end. I'm going to take the end of my brush, get a little bit of paint on there, because I feel like this needs some little dots in here. So I'm just going to touch that there, and then as I go, the dots will get a little smaller because the paint is wearing off of the end of my brush. Just let them trail out. You know, I think I actually want to add some of those little dots to this flower. So what you want to do is come into your paint with the end of your brush and lightly pull it out so that you have a little point. Can you see that little point on the end of my brush? And I'm not jamming the end of the brush right onto the canvas. I'm really just going to touch that point. Just that little point of paint. So I think I'm about to the point where I'm just going to start doing a lot of the elements that we've already done, just kind of all over the place. But there's one more that I want to experiment with. I just need to decide where to put it. I think maybe right here, kind of coming out of where this leaf leaves. Just kind of like that. And what I'm going to do is very similar to the dots that I did here, but I'm going to make this entire line the little dots. And as I get toward the end, I'm going to make them a little bit smaller so they kind of taper off. Not like that one at all. Okay, so all of these things that I've done, I'm going to go through and just add a bunch of them all over the place. And then when I'm done with that, we'll decide if we're going to add any other elements to our birds. kind of feel like our birds need a little something on the top of their heads. But I want to go pretty simple with it. I'm not going to make it connect with their heads. Just kind of a little feathery crest thing going down the back. So if you have some little spots that are kind of blank, you can add a little butterfly or something, and I think I'm going to do that. So I'm going to start with the body. Using my liner brush, I'm just going to make a little line. I don't want a very big butterfly. And I'm going to keep my butterfly kind of in line with some of the shapes that we have going on in here. I think I'm going to bring it out a bit, around. Give it a little curl on the end. And I think I'm going to put a little curl on this end too. Give them some little teeny tiny antennas. They don't need to be attached. Just a little tiny line. Little tiny point of paint on the end of my brush. And there I think I'm done with my background. So I'm going to go back to my angle brush, load up with a bit of black paint, and then I'm going to come into my white and just grab out a tiny bit and just add some subtle highlights to my birds. I'm not trying to highlight them any way in particular. I'm just giving them some little streaks of a gray or color, so they're not pitch black. We'll let everything else be pitch black. Just kind of drag that down the edge and then smooth it out with the flat part of my brush. If you get too much, wipe it off, grab a little bit more black. If you decide that you don't like this or you get it too blended or too bright, whatever, you can just let it dry and paint it black again. You could certainly go through here and highlight everything if you want. Add some white into these little spaces, whatever you want to do. I actually really like the silhouette look with the birds that have a little bit of highlight, so I'm just going to sign it and call it done. And there's your Valentine's Day Lovebirds painting. Feel free to get super creative with this. You can use any colors you like. You don't have to use the colors that I used. If you wanted to make this a couples painting, you could even do 2 canvases and each of you paint one of the birds and then cooperate together to do the little flurry bits all over the place. If you like this video, please make sure you subscribe so that you can paint with me every week. You can do so by clicking here. If you want to keep painting with me today, check out these 2 videos that I've picked just for you. Thank you as always for painting with me, everyone, and I'll see you next time.